This podcast episode is brought to you by Coors Light. These days, everything is go, go, go. It's nonstop hustle all the time. Work, friends, family, expect you to be on 24/7. Well, sometimes you just need to reach for a Coors Light because it's made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's as crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. It is literally made to chill. Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that's made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast.
To be honest, he's taught me so much. He's even taught me how to, really get out of the pick and rolls and go for lobs and, just being that defensive anchor, talking when I'm fatigued in late games like this. And, he's always on me, and I don't take it as nothing. I don't take it personal. I'm just so honored that he takes the time out to tell me constructive criticism, and I take the best out of it and make it a positive, man. And I'm just blessed, Dude has high IQ, and he brings a lot to this team. And the leadership he brings and how he approaches the game is just contagious.
Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's 24 hours after the second overtime loss of the weekend. It was a brutal weekend overall, though, Mike.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. I'm weirdly encouraged after it because of how well DeAndre Ayton played and how important that is to the future of this team. But I will not deny that watching two tough overtime losses back to back had a bit of an effect on my overall mood, which I'm still working on. Like, I think there's a point where when you were a Suns fan in the last 5-6 years, there was a point where losses completely stopped affecting my mood entirely, where it's like, I just expect them to lose this game, so I'm just going to watch it for different reasons. And if they win, fun. And if they don't win, whatever. There is a different way of watching games so far for me this season. Is that the case with you too?
Well, yes, but I'm going to be honest. The way, because I was mad after the first loss, I was really mad because I thought they had it. I really thought they had it, and they had.
If Devin Booker stayed in, maybe they would have.
And they had the freaking timeouts, and that enraged me. Anyway, we're not gonna get bogged down into that today because it's been 48 hours after the fact. My point is, then when Devin Booker was hurt, I went into the next game and I was like, look, the only way I can say for sure that I won't get mad tonight is if I go in with the expectation of us losing. This Denver team is really good. And so that's what I did, and I expected them to lose, and you know what? It still hurt, but it didn't hurt quite as bad. And at least what I get to take out of it, I mean, look, Jamal Murray traveled.
The Suns won that game, technically.
The officials confirmed that he traveled.
Yeah.
So, it still hurt. It still sucked. At least DeAndre Ayton played really well. At least we got a good game out of Chris Paul, including some good clutch performance. And especially, Frank Kaminsky just kind of demonstrated just how far DeAndre Ayton has come, I think, solely with his performance in the second overtime. So yeah, there were good things to take out of it, but it does hurt. And man, Denver is not a team that I want to match up with against in the first round.
I saw a lot of non-Suns fans asking for Denver-Phoenix playoff games. And look, any playoff game would make me excited, but that would be brutal. Jokic flops a lot, and it's very frustrating.
I know. And I know like Utah is like 13-4 right now or whatever, but I still maintain give me Utah any day in a 7-game series.
The Suns match up well.
Yeah, over Denver. Like Denver, I think, is now solidly in that tier with both LA teams where it's like, please not them. So if that means, that means essentially you got to get the 4th or the 5th seed. If we're assuming that Denver is eventually going to kind of work their way into the 3rd seed, we don't know for sure, but I do think they're the 3rd best team in the Western Conference. And yeah, they're scary. That's 3 really close games we've had with them. But it is at least encouraging that they were able to keep it close last night without Devin Booker. That's something to take away from it as well too.
If the Suns end up in the playoffs against the Nuggets, just no Scott Foster, please. Just no Scott Foster. I'm just going to beg for that. 15 games have now passed Suns are one game above 500. Arguably had a really rough stretch recently, and I guess it's not arguable. They had a rough stretch recently, but I think there are things to be excited about that. We decided this was a good time to do a check-in with our friend Dan Favale, who hosts the Hardwood Knocks podcast and writes for Bleacher Report. He's going to come on in just a bit. We're going to have a long conversation about what the Suns have been so far, and then we're going to revisit some of the Bleacher Report rankings that he wrote about before the season and talk about how the 5 Suns players that were on that list have played so far this season and whether or not we're stock up or stock down on where their rankings are. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this conversation. Dan is a really smart guy and a great writer, and I think we had a really good conversation with him. But it's long, so we're not going to waste your time here. We'll switch over to that.
Wait. I just want to say one thing. I want to boost Dan's rep a little bit as much as I can before we switch over into that. He invited us onto his podcast, the Hardwood Knocks podcast, both of us, in the preseason, and just as a demonstration of how much of a believer this guy is in the Suns. He, I think, was higher on them in terms of his win-loss projection for this season than both of us. So this, Dan's a guy who he's watched a lot of Suns games the past few years, and he really believes in what this team is doing currently.
Yes, and to that point, I think you'll enjoy the conversation because he's someone who's very informed about this team. So we'll switch over to that now, and hopefully you guys enjoy it, and we'll be back next week. All right, very excited about the guest joining us, a NBA writer for Bleacher Report, co-host of the Hardwood Knocks podcast, deputy editor for NBA Math, and another Blue Wire bro, as we've started to call them, Dan Favale. Dan, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
Good. I mean, we really appreciate you coming on. We came on and before the season onto the Hardwood Knocks podcast, talked a lot about the Suns. It seems like something that you were following pretty closely, which we appreciate. You know, as somebody like you who covers the entire NBA, it's nice to have somebody kind of feel as good about the Suns as Sam and I were feeling. You know, it's an interesting time, I think, to come on and talk about the Suns now that they're 8-7. A weird stretch, really. They lost 5 of the last 7 games. Some tough losses in there as well. 3 overtimes in the last 2 games alone. But I still think it's a really interesting team to talk about. And, you know, after about 15 games, it's a nice time to sort of check in with you and see how you're feeling, just from a general perspective. I know you've caught a few Suns games, more than I think a lot of people at this point of the season. How do you feel about the Suns season, how they've looked so far?
They're so clear, and one, thank you for the kind words. I think it was not to tattletale on you guys, but you guys were talking me like down on the Suns when you came on the podcast. So I was like, I could see them winning at a 58 win pace, and you're like, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
But they're so clearly unfinished. But I'm almost encouraged because you're talking about this past stretch. Like there's just been so much noise in there when you're looking at Devin Booker already missed a full game. Sarge has been banged up, but it's just still so new for everything. There's like definitely concerns there, but I think I remain just as high on them as I was before. Maybe not in raw win totals for this year, but they feel like the quintessential team that, assuming nothing happens with COVID or injuries at this point, that they should be peaking at the right time, like later in the year as the playoffs start. When there's there's just better chemistry where DeAndre Ayton hopefully is more consistent, or Chris Paul and Devin Booker are playing better off one another, or Devin Booker is like has a handle again or something. So it feels like, I don't know why I'm still so optimistic, but I feel like I might even be more optimistic about the late season postseason Suns than I was at the start of this year.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense because it's encouraging just how much the supporting cast has stepped up, because anyone who's watched the Suns so far has seen Chris Paul not playing super great, Devin Booker the same, but you see guys like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and so on step up. But anyway, to summarize for you, Dan, no more 58 win pace. You're not feeling that anymore.
I won't rule it out, but yeah, I was clearly a miss. 57 or 58, whatever it was, it does look like that's going to end up being way off. I'm hoping that you guys, I'm not even to turn the question on you, just to explain why their first iteration of the starting lineup just didn't work for me. It made so much sense on paper, and I know they made the change with Cam Johnson in there, at least for now when they're going to be at full strength. And I know teams were shooting, I think, when I looked it up, like 44% on threes whenever Bridges, CP3, and Booker and Ayton are on the floor, I haven't been able to figure out like what is happening there. That lineup just seems to make so much sense to me, and yet it just wasn't working.
I have some theories. I'll go first, Sam, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The first theory is DeAndre Ayton wasn't like the last 4 games for DeAndre Ayton have now solidified in my mind that the first 11 games before that he was just playing badly on offense. And I think it's sort of gotten to a point where I'm wondering, like after those first 10 or 11 games, I'm like, I hope this is not who DeAndre Ayton is, because this is going badly. He's not attacking. He's not looking at the rim. He's scared. He's shooting some long range shots from mid range that are just not good shots. Those kinds of things. I think the DeAndre Ayton stepping up and playing well in the last 4 games have made it clear that when he is more engaged in rim running and attacking the rim, the pick and roll game with Chris Paul starts to make a lot more sense. All of a sudden, the assists are coming a lot easier. 14 assists in the first half of the first game against Denver, 12 assists in the first half. Not as good in the second half of both of those games, funny enough. I think 1 in the first game, maybe 2 in the second game. But to see them have now a consistent rim runner, somebody who's not afraid to attack the rim and fight for those offensive rebounds, the entire thing started to make more sense. I don't think that Jay Crowder was the problem at all, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Jay Crowder re-entered the starting lineup now that DeAndre Ayton is playing better. But I will give another shout-out, too, because I think Devin Booker was struggling at the beginning of the season as well. I think it's fair to give Chris Paul a little more time because it's a new team for him, a bunch of new teammates, and he's just a guy who likes to feel things out, I think. But Devin Booker, I expected him to be better at the beginning of the season. So I don't think it had anything to do with what they did. I do think Cameron Johnson helps them to speed up the pace a little bit, but it's more of a concerted effort by Chris Paul to speed up the pace that will matter over time. Mm-hmm. That's my theory, and I'm glad you brought it up because I don't think we've had a good chance to talk in depth about it. But Sam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I still haven't seen anything from Cam that necessarily makes me believe that coaching decision should stay long term. Look, I've explained this before, and I just think still it may be a little bit stubborn, but the offense with Paul and Booker was always going to be predicated on a lot of isolation possessions and shots when you can't get into that pick and roll game with DeAndre Ayton. And Chris Paul and Devin Booker just haven't been hitting those shots. And at a certain point, they will start hitting those shots. Actually, Chris Paul has been hitting those shots in the past 2 games specifically. And so I think if you go back to the original lineup with DeAndre Ayton playing the way he currently is and Chris Paul hitting the shots he's supposed to make, and you're playing teams that aren't the Nuggets with questionable coaching decisions and refereeing here and there, you win most of those games. I think for the most part, the Suns played really well the past 2 games. They were just up against a really tough opponent, and a couple of things didn't go their way. So, again, it might be stubborn, but I don't actually think anything was necessarily wrong with that lineup, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go back to it.
I mean, that all makes sense. The Crowder thing, I feel like I was an advocate of him being in the starting 5. I might like him a little bit off the bench more. I can't believe I'm saying this about Jay Crowder, but one of the things is, like, I feel like he's not empowered enough on offense all the time, where it's, I think a lot what the Suns can do, and I know they've been playing a little bit faster over the past few games, but, like, if you have the ball after a turnover or after a live rebound, just, like, go up the floor and maybe push the pace a bit, and he doesn't seem like he's doing that. And then when he's playing off the ball in the half court, and again, you've watched so much more than I have, he just sometimes drifts into these weird, awkward spaces, and I'm like, well, maybe in the second unit you can give Jay Crowder the ball just a bit more, where he, like, yeah, there are those, like, heat checks independent of actually being on a heater, but it's almost better than a lot of the stuff that I feel like we've seen now. And I'm just really interested because of how, the sample sizes are still small, but those Sarge at the 5 lineups are still just destructive towards opponents. And I kind of like the Sarge Crowder dynamic as well.
Yeah. That's interesting because we haven't really gotten a good chance to see that. Sarge is actually out with the health and safety protocols. I'm not sure if that's some sort of contact tracing thing, or if at this point maybe he is actually somebody who's tested positive and could be out for more of an extended period of time. But I do think that's actually interesting to think about. I haven't put a lot of thought into that. Sarge and Crowder next to each other on the bench could be really good, especially because Sarge, for as good as he is, I think that one of the biggest advantages of him being on the bench and playing the center position is offensively. He's just really great offensively. And the entire bench lineup, Javon Carter's on the bench. In if you have Jay Crowder there, if you have some sort of lineup that has Javon Carter, Jay Crowder, and Saric at the 5, that's pretty interesting as far as defensively. And then Saric could keep it going offensively at the 5. I like Johnson in the starting lineup, but I also like when we were watching the Nuggets game, that first Nuggets game, watching the way the Suns were struggling to keep up with Jokic on switches just made me think, well, this is why you have a guy like Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder can specifically be the strong guy that switches on to Jokic in the post and not just get abused. Obviously, Jokic is still going to put some work in there regardless of who's guarding him, but Crowder's big enough and strong enough to take a lot of that beating, whereas a guy like Cameron Johnson is not. Even Mikal Bridges is not strong enough to, as long as he's not built to guard somebody like Jokic. It's really only Ayton and Crowder. In the second game of the back-to-back, because Booker was out, Monty went with Crowder, which at first, I was like, the bench is going to get killed, and it did. The bench did get killed, but the starting lineup played so much better because they had another guy that can fight there. So it's an interesting thing where I'm not sure that Monty's the type of coach to actually change the starting lineup based on actual matchups. I kind of would like it if he did. I just don't really. It's not something that I've ever seen him do. But when LeBron's in the game or Anthony Davis, if you're playing the Lakers, I can't imagine Cameron Johnson continuing to do well. Maybe there's a little bit of make them adjust to you instead of you adjusting to them. But I mean, why have Crowder if you're not going to use him to defend those stars? I guess is how I look at it. What do you think?
I did not consider that at all. So that is a great point. Cam Johnson going up against Anthony Davis might be a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, and you know what? To playoffs, it could change. But Sam, what do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, about Cam matching up with Anthony Davis specifically, or about?
Or do you think that it's something that they should do as far as matching up in the starting lineup, or do you think it's better to have like a set starting lineup and just go with that?
Man, that's a personal philosophy question, and I think generally I'm not that much of a matchup guy. It depends on your personnel, right? Don't we think Cam is kind of a flow of the offense rhythm type player who might benefit from having a set role? At least, I feel like Cam Johnson generally would benefit from playing with the same guys who he knows are going to get him looks in specific spots. And so if you're going to start him, I'd rather you just start him most of the time. And I don't know, I think you can still stagger the minutes in interesting ways. But I don't know. And to your point, Mike, I really have no idea what Monty's philosophy has been throughout his coaching career with regard to that too. I've never gone back and studied how much did he change his starting lineup combinations when he was with New Orleans. I just haven't done the research on that, but it's an interesting question.
I think it's especially tough because Cam Johnson was actually playing really well with the bench. And until Saric is back, and we can actually, there's so much predicated on what Saric can do with the bench lineups. And until he's back, it's really difficult to decide what the best decision with everything is going forward. And that's, I think, Dan, to bring it back to what you were talking about, I actually think that's one of the reasons why you can still be optimistic about this team, because although they've lost a few of the last ones, Devin Booker, Chris Paul can play better, and I think they will, and there's reasons to believe that they will going forward. But also, there's not really been a lot of time where they've all been healthy at the same time and everyone's sort of been on the court. At first, it was just Jalen Smith, which is like, we don't have to cover Jalen Smith, Dan. I know you're not a believer in that pick, and there's reasons to believe that that's the right choice.
Sam did tag me in I think it was a preseason video of him putting the ball on the floor and spinning in for a hoop. I think it was right after we recorded a podcast, and I obliterated the pick. I wanted Devin Vassell or Tyrese Halliburton on this team.
I mean, you and everyone else, man, and me too, but he's shown some off-the-dribble ability. He hit a 3 yesterday.
Pretty three, too.
I'm cutting the kid a lot of slack. Like he's been out for a while, so
he tested positive. I'll give him that too.
He was COVID positive. He's been out for a month, so he's going to be back in the lineup now. But I'm not, I'm watching him with a watchful eye, but I'm not necessarily taking away any significant sort of analysis from what he does in the next 5 or 10 games, because it might be ugly, honestly.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, it will.
I'll
be
tag you in those videos then.
I think he's showed a lot of interesting things. It's just the role on this team is still what is yet to be defined, and that's a big thing. Something we wanted to cover with you, Dan, because it's been 15 games. It's a good time to sort of check in on it's just how we feel, Sam and I obviously, and how you feel as somebody who's covering the league as a whole. I think it's difficult to understand the context of how well players are playing without sort of watching the rest of the league. You did a sort of ranking of NBA players, as Bleacher Report, ESPN, and everyone does before the season. There was 5 Suns players on the top 100 list, and what we wanted to do is go through each one of those 5 players and use it as an opportunity to discuss how they've looked after 15 games and sort of do a stock up, stock down on their rankings and where they were. Now, before we get into this, I want to say these rankings are hard. And Dan, you do a good job on them.
How used to animosity are you at this point, Dan, in your position with Bleacher Report? Because I know the people who are listening to this who aren't familiar with your work specifically heard Dan Favale, writer, Bleacher Report, and felt some type of way about it. So I want to give you the open floor for just a second to defend yourself first.
Look, I think when it's ESPN, when it's Bleacher Report, when it's just the sites that are covering it nationally, I think there will be natural animosity there, and there are going to be fans that I recognize are just going to know the Suns better than I am. The one thing I'll say is I know everything is promoted with ultra incandescence. Try and read it. Like, I try and put the topic, like, rankings is a cookie cutter topic. Like, I don't think I'm winning a Pulitzer for doing rankings, but I do try and make them unique in my voice and at least the thought and the analysis that's going into them. And I understand the game and that people are going to get mad. I know why they exist. But if you're mad, like, maybe just take a look at the text first and then get mad after that. And you can tell me why I was wrong.
Yeah, I don't envy anyone that has to do these kinds of rankings. Actually, before we get into it, something that I do ask a lot of people who cover the entire NBA, what's your impression of Suns fans and the way they sort of react or act regarding coverage and things that you say or write about, or even what you've seen of them online for other people? And feel free to be honest. We've asked other people this before, and they've been very honest. So I would like to hear what you think about Suns fans, just from a general perspective.
They're like, if they either agree or disagree with something, they're going to be united in it, where it just feels like where they've been mad at me in the past. I think this is going back a couple years where I had Jason Tatum like appreciably higher than Devin Booker, and it felt like that Suns fandom was just a monolith of people who wanted me to die. But then if you when I've said like nicer things, where I think I got to the point where it was maybe a little bit before last season or at the start of last season, I seemed to be higher on Devin Booker than the national media consensus. They were like super nice, like in bunches, and so in droves, and so they definitely understand the game for sure. They are, I would say they're probably, I think, closer to the even-keeled fan bases that I've interacted with, where it's like some can skew like they're not willing to hear any criticism, or maybe I'm just not, hearing the people who are yelling at me when I do criticize the Suns. But the past 2 years of Suns interactions, I think, have been very positive.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me, because I think you are one of the people that has been right about the Suns, is how I'll put it, more often than others, because I think for a lot of Suns fans, they can tell when people aren't watching the team just from how people talk about it, not necessarily their specific opinions, but the words that they use or what they say. Like Shaq, for example, on TNT. Shaq clearly doesn't watch most of the NBA, and I know there's a lot of drama about him, but we were laughing on our last episode because he said DeAndre Ayton should be averaging 20 and 9 being 9 rebounds, and it's like, if you watch DeAndre Ayton, he should be averaging more than 9 rebounds. He's more than capable of averaging more than 9 rebounds, and he should be averaging more than 9 rebounds. A small thing, but it's something that just, I think, points to the fact that he's just not watched DeAndre Ayton, and I think a lot of Suns fans will latch onto that specific language and pounce on someone if they think that they are just not watching the team. I always say, though, it's okay that people weren't watching the team for the last 5 years. It's okay.
Well, and I agree with that. I've said to this day that they need to actually prove it before we should expect that everyone watches them. So, I think it's good that they're mostly doing that this season so far. But also, to your point, Mike, there are just certain phrases that are trigger words. Like empty calorie is one that, will instantly kind of trigger a lot of Suns fans.
That can't be related to Devin Booker at all, right?
Yeah. We still make looter and a riot jokes.
Yes, that one too.
Constantly.
I do. If I remember correctly, I think one of the first interactions with Sam after we had followed each other was he went at me for my Tatum over Booker ranking. I don't know what year this was. And you, relative to what other people were saying, you were very nice, but it was, I told you before I started, when I see people where they're mutual follows and they say stuff about it, I'll just slide into the mentions and be like, hey, what's up? Let them know that I wrote it. And that was one of the first interactions we had. It ended up being pretty positive, but that's a testament that I actually will slide in people's replies if I follow them and they're not happy with what I did.
Well, that's sort of, it's a thankless job doing the rankings. I think no matter what, I think a lot of the sort of engagements driven around rankings are just people being angry. And maybe that's going to happen when people listen to this episode too. But I think your rankings were really high on the Suns, for the record, because there were 5 players that you had in the top 100. Jay Crowder at 97, Mikal Bridges at 85.
That was like 83 spots too low. I recognize that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. And I know you love him, so it's going to be a fun conversation there, I'm sure. DeAndre Ayton at 37. Chris Paul at 22 and Devin Booker at 15. I think that it's unfair to say, would you have them higher or lower? But we can just talk about how they've performed relative to expectations up till now. And I think that's probably the best way to tackle this.
The economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything. Which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed. Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's just go in order from the lowest on the list to the highest. So we'll start with Jay Crowder. Yeah, Jay Crowder at 97. I think the conversation about Jay Crowder has been kind of interesting this year. We just talked about him in the starting lineup and how, I think he's been really good for the Suns so far. He's such a smart off-ball defender. He's so strong on the ball. Offensively, it's been a roller coaster, but I expect that to be what it is. He can't dribble at all. I was thinking recently, if Jay Crowder could dribble, really dribble, he may have been an all-star at some point, because he just can't at all. It's really limiting what he's capable of doing offensively. But I think there's the other side of the coin with Jay Crowder, and it's Miami's struggles so far this season. And I think a lot of media has been pointing at the loss of Jay Crowder as being one of the reasons that Miami has struggled. Some people have said that Miami didn't expect this loss to be as big as it was with how they've struggled. I've been a big fan of Jay Crowder so far. Dan, what do you think about Jay Crowder on the Suns so far?
I'd probably skew long-term. I've actually probably been a little bit disappointed in him on offense in Phoenix, a stock down there. But long-term, I'd probably be stock neutral because I haven't seen anything that I don't think will be different. If you don't think he could dribble, Miami has Mo Harkless right now, when he's actually available to play. And they didn't even really play him that much. So Jay Crowder, I think, is more dynamic than a player like that. And I think you're totally right on defense. And I know that he's been you use the word roller coaster. I think that's perfect. His entire career when it comes to hitting three-pointers, he's 34.5% on open and wide open threes this year. Those are looks that he has to hit at a higher clip, and I thought he was going to because this roster makes so much sense with the threats around him. I mean, even if you expected, I just look at it as, okay, you have Chris Paul, you have Devin Booker, you're spending a ton of time with them, and then there should be Ayton, who has that suction as if he's rolling to the basket, which, as you already mentioned, he would have needed to do more, at least until these past 5 or 6 games. So I understand that there's the feeling out process, but I really thought that offensively he was going to be a lot more dynamic than I've seen. And from the full Suns games I've watched, just some of the places he winds up when he doesn't have the ball, where he's just inside the arc, on the catch, and I don't know, it's just something has felt off there, and I can't really explain it. And that's why I was wondering before if being in the second unit might rejuvenate him some, even if he ends up spending a great deal of time of his time on the court with the starters.
Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think he's just the type of player, Dan, unfortunately, where he's going to drift to those awkward spots. And I don't really know if he has the skill set within him to, play more of an on-ball role or do things to correct that. He's just, he's going to be primarily a spot-up shooter. However, our buddy David Nash, who's a big Suns fan, I want to credit him here because he's the one who said first in the offseason about Jay Crowder, that Jay Crowder is either like a really good bad shooter or a really bad good shooter, and he's just not a good shooter. He's just not. So he's going to get a 7 or 8 3-point attempts per game, but that what did you say it was 35% wide open? Is that what the number was?
Yeah, they're basically identical whether you're looking at open or wide open. He's like in the 34s.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting from him coming in, and I wasn't expecting us to get better than that, unfortunately. Like I just, I was willing to write it off that he's going to sit there in the corner at least when he's in the right spot, and he's going to have gravity just by virtue of being there. But his actual shooting talent is going to rate, it's going to rate out as maybe average to below average for a guy who takes as many threes as he does. Now, I do want to give him...
He is 6 of 15 on threes after taking one or more dribbles. So that's
interesting.
Sense. It's like
that's
40%
interesting
on those, but 34.5% on wide open catch and shoots. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
I don't think he should be taking more of those, though.
It has to even
No, that was not my point.
I do want to give him credit on defense as long as we're having the conversation, just because one of the ways in which I think I was humbled a little bit earlier this season, I was having a discussion with Kellen Olson. This was a few weeks ago. He's a beat reporter, in case you don't know, Dan, who covers the Suns. And I think I got carried away in a specific game where it was one of those games Cam Johnson had maybe 2 steals and a block. And I got carried away, and I was like, is Cam Johnson, could it be true that Cam Johnson is as good of a defender as Jay Crowder? Like, I got really carried away one night, and Kellen was like, no, it's not possible. and so after that point, what I did, because, Jay's a longtime veteran. He's been around for a long time, but I've never really, he's one of those players who just blends into the background. You don't really watch him closely until he's on your team and you have reason to. And so over the past couple of weeks, I've made it more of a personal mission to just watch Jay Crowder's off-ball defense. Really watch what he's doing, and the approach that he takes with his stunts, with his digs, with his ability to break up plays, kind of in the nail area on defense. I mean, he makes the Suns' pick and roll defensive scheme work. His on-ball defense may not actually be that impressive because he may not have like the burst or athleticism to just stick with anyone, even if he is very strong, at least if we're talking about his perimeter play. But man, his team defense is really just so much better than I think I initially gave him credit for. So I did want to give that a quick shout out. And, I think he's more than earned his value with what he's doing on that end. Just with what they did yesterday, the switching, and I think Mike did allude to this earlier, but the switching that the Suns did the past couple games against Denver, whether you think they should have done that in the first place or not, I think it mostly worked. And I think you can't even begin to deploy that kind of thing if you don't have Jay Crowder in there with his team defense and what he was doing to make sure that he could do whatever he could to deny Jokic the ball after Ayton switched onto Murray or whoever was on the perimeter. And it didn't work every time, but when it did, it was very clear that it was Jay who was making it happen.
Yeah. I actually, from this perspective, Dan, I'd like to ask you, how close do you think Cameron Johnson would be to breaking that top 100 at this point? Because, taking Jay's spot in that starting lineup and as good as he's been, I think that actually, to be honest, I think his shooting has been a little worse than I expected as far as Cameron Johnson, but I think he's shown a lot more as far as dribbling, and I think his defense has been much better than anyone really thought it would be coming into the league. That was one of those draft picks that was heavily criticized, and if he's not close, it's fine at this point, but what do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I think you had mentioned something to me about Cam Johnson's defense when we were talking like a week or two ago at this point, and so I watched some of that, and it feels like he's not someone who's going to be super strong, but he just moves better than I think people have given him credit for, and he has, like, for someone who doesn't foul a lot, like, he makes, like, actual plays more often if you're watching closely than you would think with someone who, that low foul rate. Like, he gets more blocks and steals than you would think, but it's more than that, where it feels like he's aggressive or he's able to, like, stay in front of people you wouldn't peg for him to stay in front. I do agree with, I think it was Sam that was talking about, or maybe before when we were talking about you don't want him matching up with Anthony Davis. Like, there's, that is the typical Jay Crowder role, and that's where people diverge from him, is that it's the same thing with Robert Covington. When you hear 3-and-D, I don't think people really take into account team defense that much, or even the ability to defend, like, bigger guys better than, like, let's call them pure wings or something. And that's sort of like where Jay Crowder is at, where not that you would prefer to have him on an Anthony Davis as opposed to like a Paul George, but he's just better defending those type of guys because he is so strong, and like you said, he's not super quick. But I will say that Cam Johnson is just, as someone who dumped all over the pick too when it was made in 2019, he's watching him a little bit more closely on that end, he's been a lot better than I ever could have anticipated. And I even had a note in here. You had mentioned that he's just been better dribbling, like just 10 of 15 on drives this year when he's shooting, and 9 of 15 on off the dribble jump shots.
Really?
9 of 18, excuse me, on off the dribble jump shots. And so that's something that takes you aback, is that he has, if you want to call them counters, whatever, it's not just he's going to be this spot up guy where like Jake Crowder probably needs to be that guy. And by saying he needs to be that guy, like stop drifting in all these weird places, be an actual spot up guy.
Yeah, and don't if he does attack, Jay Crowder has actually made some nice passes. Something I didn't really know about Jay before he was on the Suns is his capability of passing has impressed me. And early in the season, he was the best at finding Ayton. One of the concerns I had with him leaving the starting lineup, but Ayton's aggression has sort of changed all of that, made it work a little bit better. All right, the next guy, Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges, who arguably had his worst game of the season in this second Nuggets game. It was foul trouble, really, that did it all, which limited his minutes and caused him to struggle. Didn't score until the fourth quarter, ended the game with maybe 7 points.
He had 11. He exploded low-key in that fourth quarter in the last couple minutes.
Yeah, he did well. 7 straight points, I think, from Mikal in the fourth quarter after scoring 0 in the first 3 quarters. 85, you had him on the list. This has got to be a stock up, right?
Yeah, this is clearly a stock up, and it.
But I want to give you credit, Dan, actually, because I almost forgot. I pulled out here. So yes, you had him 85. Yes, you have to atone for your sin. But you said here, quote, you were talking about how Mikal Bridges played well in the bubble. You said he broke out the occasional pull-up triple, improved his decision-making when dribbling into traffic, kept the ball moving, and contributed to finding cracks in the defense away from the ball. It was a breakthrough stretch, and it lasted long enough to portend a breakthrough year. So, take a bow, Dan Favale. I would say that actually you kind of called it.
I will never take victory laps because of how often I'm wrong, but that writing aged so much better than most of the other stuff that I put out there. So and look, that was done by I did all the writing, but the rankings ended up being like a panel. And so I was probably a little bit higher on Mikal than 85, but he wasn't like getting higher than 75, even if I was doing it alone. And I think you can put him in fairly higher than that at this point. And what I've been like definitely been impressed by is that they have, last season it looked like he would have the ability to really branch out on offense if they needed him to. He doesn't really have that option right now because of the Chris Paul stuff. Like more of his shots this year are coming off the catch, 55.4% compared to 41.2%. The thing that's still staggering to me is that both the volume or the frequency with which him and Devin Booker are being used, like in cut situations, is down from last year, which I think that's probably a symptom of how Chris Paul prefers to play. But he's still he's someone 50% on drives this year. He could still put the ball on the floor. He's still, I think, an underrated passer when he's moving, and I think he does have the ability to offer more if you want him to hit maybe some off the dribble jumpers. I don't know if that will ever be his role, at least so long as Chris Paul is next to Devin Booker. But he's if there was any doubt that he is everything he does is just scalable, and talking about his defense as well, which the thing has been like, well, he's not like the best one-on-one defender, and I wrote something else, or I tweeted something else at the beginning of the year where it's like, I don't think he gets enough credit for doing that, because he's clearly not the strongest, but he just knows how to use length and positioning, and so he is just one of my favorite players to watch on that at number one. And I don't know how high I can stop being on Mikal Bridges. Like, I don't know what the limit would be to how high I'm, or how much Mikal Bridges stock I would buy at this point.
What do you think? What do you think his ceiling is as a player? This is a common conversation on this podcast, as you can imagine, as people who only talk about the Suns, really. But Mikal Bridges, it's an interesting thing. You talked about how many of his shots are coming off the catch. Like, a lot of the ceiling of a player like Mikal Bridges, his defense will get better as it gets stronger, which is an amazing thing to even say because of how good it's been. But there's even this sort of, can he create shots for himself? Like, what is the heights that his offense can reach is sort of, to me, what will dictate his ceiling. He's already at the point where I think he's going to be getting a pretty massive extension at the end of the season. And if he doesn't, we can all break out our pitchforks for Robert Sarver at that point specifically. But from your perspective, just watching him, you cover the rest of the league. You've seen how players develop. He was drafted older, right? He's an older guy already in his rookie deal, but he's actually older than a lot of those guys. That factors in a little bit here. What do you think his ceiling is as a player?
That's interesting. The one thing I'll say is that when you have someone who's been in it feels like a very specific role offensively for most of his career. It could be tough to extrapolate what he would look like if he was given more freedom, and there's nothing that would prove this, but he seems to be like moving even quicker when he's driving the ball this year. I don't know if it's because he's so excited because he's actually driving and doesn't have to be a catch and shoot or whatever. I could see him. No, I don't think he's ever going to be the engine of an offense or like this top tier playmaker, but could we put him into, if you're going to expand his offensive role, and I think that would be key if you want to really substantially up his ranking, like is, top like 40 or 35 in the league, like that type of player where it's maybe he'll make some all-star appearances or as a fringe all-star every year. That feels like a good ceiling for him, and maybe he even reaches that now in his current role. And you mentioned his extension. I know he's older, but he had to be seeing OG Anunoby get 472 and be like, well, I'm worth more than that.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that he's not worth more than that at this point. Sam, what have you thought about Mikal Bridges so far?
I mean, what do you expect me to say? He's been amazing. Dan did make me look up the cutting stats. I still think that's interesting, and I think it's interesting you took note of it. Dan, he's got 8 cutting possessions through 15 games this year. Last year he had 90 in 73 games, so that's a lot of numbers at once. But basically he has cut his cutting frequency in half this season, and that's been really interesting because traditionally, even in his rookie season, Mikal Bridges has been one of the best cutters in the NBA, so I would like to see him do a little bit more of it, but I guess there hasn't necessarily been that necessity with him shooting like 45-47% from deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's just he's good in transition, he's good at cutting, he's a confident shooter now, he shoots with no hesitation. It really does make kind of that pick and roll creation the final frontier for Mikal Bridges. And so to that end, maybe it is time where, I don't know if it would be the best thing for the Suns offense on any given night, but I don't know, maybe you stagger the lineups a little bit weird and see if you can experiment with a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, Mikal Bridges, throw him into a few pick and rolls and just see what happens. Because if he figures that out, then that does unlock the higher ceiling of being a top 30, top 40 player. But he does have to figure that out eventually. If he can't figure that out, then he's just going to be like a superstar role player who's really, really good at everything he does off the ball, but never quite an on-ball force.
He is the one where I ranked him as the most underappreciated or underrated player in the NBA last year. I think that's the last negative interaction I had with Sun fans, is that they were claiming he actually wasn't underrated. And I think the exercise is I meant more so by the national media.
Yeah.
I think fans typically appreciate their own players just fine.
Yeah.
But what kind of sucks, though, is that if he doesn't get the opportunity to branch out, he still will always be talked about in the terms of like a role player or a superstar role player. And I think that he, regardless of what happens with his role in Phoenix, who he is now, to me, is just better than that. And I just don't think he gets enough credit. And look, again, they've made some changes to just you mentioned, the cutting numbers. And just if you're him and you saw what you were doing towards the end of last year, you probably expected to have a bigger role. And yet now you've had to scale into this different sort of fit with Chris Paul being there as well. And he's doing so well within it. And I don't know, it's probably too bold to say he's been their best player, but has there been a player who's just more consistent than him for the Suns this year? And I'm genuinely asking you guys that. I'm trying to think of one and I can't.
The advanced analytics literally do say he's the best player. Now, I will say if DeAndre Ayton can play with any level of consistency as he's shown the last 4 games, then he shows how he is the most valuable player to the Suns scheme by far. But
he'll be an interesting conversation next too. And of course, Devin Booker, as he plays better.
Yeah, of course. But no one's been consistent except for Mikal Bridges. So I do think the answer is Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, it's funny to say that after his game against Denver, but it's tough.
So trade everyone and rebuild around Mikal Bridges. We're all in agreement.
Well, he can never leave the team. That's basically how I feel at this point. Regardless of what ends up being the team in 5 years, as long as Mikal's on it, I think I'll be okay. He's a winner. I mean, 2 national championships in college. He's just a guy that just kind of fits in whatever you need him to do. I do wonder if those cutting numbers will go up because the type of gravity that Cameron Johnson has is different than Jay Crowder. Even if Jay Crowder will shoot it as if he's Cameron Johnson, Cameron Johnson is known as that guy, and defenses react differently based on that. So that's actually something that I'm glad you brought it up. That's something that I'm going to take note of going forward and see if those cutting numbers change now that the starting lineup is a little different.
What would you guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, what would you guys pay him? If he finishes the season exactly as he is right now, what would you give him in an extension?
I think he's in the $20 million range at this point. $20 million. I mean, it's hard to argue that he's not, right?
My 401k, he can have everything.
Yeah, and the thing with the type of player that he is, because the league in general is just so hard up for wings, and that's who everyone lusts after too. If they let him get to restricted free agency,
he might get
someone's going to come over the top with maybe it won't be max money, but it'll be near max money.
Yeah. I think that extension conversation is going to be very, very, very important, and it's a tough thing for the Suns because DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges are going to hit that extension eligibility at the exact same time, and that's tough because that's two guys that can make a lot of money. The extensions wouldn't kick in until after Chris Paul is gone, so that cap space will be available in order and immediately.
Someone needs to explain that to Robert Sarver.
Yeah, he probably does need somebody to explain that to him. But I think it's I actually at the beginning of the season with how DeAndre Ayton was playing, part of me was wondering if they were going to allow him to get to restricted free agency at some point just to see what was out there for him. But if he continues to play like he has been for the last stretch, then you can't let a guy like that get to restricted free agency. You gotta get him, and that's good because if he continues playing, it's totally worthwhile. But that's just going to be a lot of cap space eaten up. Your core will be Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton going forward for a while. Not that that's a bad thing, but you're locked in at that point, and it's going to be really interesting. Speaking of DeAndre Ayton, this will be interesting. I think you had him at 37, which I think was pretty high for DeAndre Ayton in a good way. And your high, Bleacher Report in general, since it was a ranking, which I wasn't even sure about, I'm glad you brought that up, was pretty high on him, and I think that's a pretty high number. So I arguably struggled offensively at the very least at the beginning of the season. I think his defense has been pretty steady. Even that has gotten better as the season has rolled along. How do you feel about DeAndre Ayton so far?
I think the inclination would be to be like stock down, and there was a point, and I blamed the two of you for this a little bit too. After the podcast that we recorded just before the season, you made me a little bit disenchanted with DeAndre Ayton long term. I'm stock neutral on him. If not,
how could we ever do
maybe
that?
I'm sipping the juice of the past few games too much. It might even be a little bit stock up because it feels like, and I had actually talked with this about Sam a couple of days ago. What he does on defense right now, even though when you look at the on-off splits, they're just absolutely wild, that's harder to replace than what they need him to do on offense. And maybe that sort of explains why he struggled on offense so much to start, is that he's trying to find that right balance. I saw someone talking about, he's just not used to not having his post-ups. And, his post-ups are virtually the same, at least per second spectrum, compared to last year. He just seemed like I don't even know what the word is. Was it just a less confident player where it was,
yes.
He didn't even want... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's your mentality. You're exactly right. Feel free to continue, though.
Yeah, and there was I was watching even there was a couple time in the first or the second Nuggets game where it's he's just, you couldn't even say he's slipping screens with Chris Paul. It's he's not even setting real screens, and it feels like he wants to be closer to the basket so he doesn't have to put the ball on the floor before he gets there if Chris Paul is going to pass it to him. And some of the stuff that he's done, I'm at least looking at last season, he can. I don't want to see the fadeaways outside the paint. I definitely want to see more of him shooting the threes. He hit the three to open the game against Denver on Saturday, and I was my heart went boom when that happened. But he's the type of guy that can put he doesn't need to be methodical. He can do those quick one dribble, two dribble on the rolls and just really put pressure on the rim that way. And they do need him to, because at least entering this podcast, the percent of field goal attempts for them that are coming at the rim ranked dead last in the league. And when you look at the players they have, I honestly don't know who would be the answer aside from DeAndre Ayton that you could count on to put a consistent pressure on the rim. Is it Cameron Payne? Because that's almost a little bit troubling.
It's a combination of Booker, Payne,
Booker.
What I've seen the past few games, if it's steady, I would go stock up. I thought we were going to fall into a Marvin Bagley situation where I had him, I guess 2019 at this point. It was coming off his rookie year. I had him at 70-something in Bleacher Report rankings, and now I don't even know if he would make the G League rankings. So, and he's been better. So he's been better on offense the past few games. That's not fair. But I thought I was falling into a similar fall that, DeAndre Ayton's still going to be good, but does he not have that fringe star aspect that we were projecting for this season? And I think it's there. And if he figured something out on offense, that ends up being huge, because and you guys have covered this. You were among the people that turned me on to it last season. Watching him play defense is just incredible. And there are very few bigs that can switch as well as he can right now. And you can't find someone to replace sort of the east-westness of what he does, I would put it. Yeah. So if he's figuring out on offense, he becomes borderline indispensable to this team at that point. So I'm going to be, again, I might just be sipping the Kool-Aid over these past few games. I'm going stock up on DeAndre Ayton.
I love to see it. I mean, the hip mobility is the big thing with me, like you were talking about with the
You put
East-West
that
movement.
so much better than I did. I'm like
No,
east
no,
to
no, no.
westness.
East-West
That's
is
hip mobility.
it's exactly the same thing. It's the anti-Obi Toppin-ness of
That was
what
mean.
what he did.
Dan's in New York, for those who don't know.
I don't know if you saw the Rockets game. That one was that on national TV for some reason this past week?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, that was the one where whoever it was called in on his phone. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I can safely say that I watched 0 seconds of that game.
That is Dan.
fair.
That's totally fine. But
that was right after the trade. So
in case you were curious if DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges could collectively lock down Victor Oladipo and Christian Wood, the answer in that game was yes. And Ayton had a career high 5 blocks, and I think all 5 blocks, maybe one was on Boogie, but I think he got like 4 on Oladipo, and it was the same thing every time. Granted, Depot isn't, he's not what he once was, but coming downhill, Ayton flipping his hips from east to west and sort of collecting the block. He's really, really good at it. And I think what's confused me though over the past week, if there's been anything, is it's just, we know this is a mental thing. We've always known it was a mental thing. So how did he flip the switch? Like, it's always been a confidence thing, and then suddenly, we've all along, all we've asked for from DeAndre, back when we were criticizing him just a couple weeks ago, we asked him to put the ball on the floor and dribble, to take those threes without hesitation. He doesn't have to take a lot of them, but just maybe 1 or 2 a game, and to dunk the ball and look for legitimate opportunities to jump into the air and catch lobs. And he's done all of those things phenomenally in the past week, and I can't complain because there have been literally no negative attributes to his recent performance. It's just part of me is also confused, he did it. Everything we've wanted from him, he was instantly just able to flip a switch and start doing it. And so I don't know why it's so come and go, but I guess we'll see in the coming weeks if it stays.
I'm just gonna believe it. I think I started thinking about it too much after. I'm not even criticizing you guys for it. You made points we were talking, but I started thinking about his value too much to this team at the beginning of the season. And of course, the slower start doesn't help. But the past few games, it seems just perfect. And there's even, I think it was the Saturday night. The 2 Nuggets games have blurred together for me. But just the fact that I think players around the NBA sort of understand what he's able to do defensively, because he and Mikal Bridges switched Jokic and Murray ended up in the corner, and that would have been a situation where he normally would have tried to have gone baseline or something, but he saw it was DeAndre Ayton, and so he just took this fade away long 2, and that's an actual impact that DeAndre Ayton is having that I don't know that would ever technically be measured, and that the Phoenix can so liberally just do that. I would be interested. I don't have access to this data. I would love to know, and I'm just going to use this phrasing, so I'm assuming it's bad, how poorly opposing teams are shooting when it's like a Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton defended pick and roll.
Well, I think a couple things, actually. I think Nikias Duncan covered that a couple weeks ago. He said it was 0.7 points per possession, but that was a couple weeks ago, so I'm not sure what it is now.
So there's probably 0.5 now is what you're saying.
Hopefully.
I'm going to assume yes.
The other thing you're talking about there is rim deterrence. It's an actual stat. Our buddy Tim Crangus McBasketball, B-Ball Index, we've had him on the podcast before. Another Blue Wire podcast. He's been on our podcast before, and this was a while ago, granted, but one of the stats that they track is this thing called rim deterrence, because I think it is an interesting phenomenon last year. What was happening with DeAndre Ayton is we saw that he was a better rim protector, he was much improved, and he was swatting more shots at the rim and holding opponents to a lower percentage, but it hadn't actually translated on the scouting report yet. And so guys were still attacking him because they believed he couldn't do it, and they wanted him to prove that it was real. And I don't have the stat in front of me, I'd have to look it up, but rim deterrence is a quantitative measurement that they track over at B-Ball Index, and I think you could argue based on the eye test that we are seeing that out of DeAndre Ayton. It's a legitimate skill. The best rim protectors in the NBA, sometimes they start averaging fewer blocks because they're challenged so much less often, because that's how intimidating they are. And so if we can get to that point with DeAndre Ayton, it's really just solidifies the proof that guys are actually afraid of him now, which would be a big step.
Yes,
that was one of my arguments, for Joel Embiid as Defensive Player of the Year, is that it's not even that teams don't want to attack the rim. They're just, if they're a team or players that like to go after floaters, because it seems like he's coming out a little bit further in pick and rolls and just in general, they just don't even want to try them anymore. And so if Ayton gets to, that's probably an unfair comparison, but if that's the type of impact he has on the offense's thinking, that right now in the NBA is harder to replace than what he's doing on offense, as good as he's been over the past few games.
I don't think that's an unfair. At some point, that has to not be an unfair comparison. I guess defensively is the point I want to make, because his mobility arguably is even slightly better than Joel Embiid's at certain points. So Joel Embiid, I think, has like a little bit more of a physical advantage just because he's a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, arguably. But beyond that, I think the mobility is there. And I think what you guys just described here is exactly my problem with a lot of the defensive stats. You have to watch the game in order to recognize when people are just deterred. And I love that that Cranges Tim is developing a stat for that specifically. I was pretty excited to come on this specific podcast and talk about DeAndre Ayton because it's just a nice time to come on and talk about him after the games that we've seen. Offensively, the things that he has done has made the starting lineup look good. The starting lineup was bad. Arguably 4 games in a row where he was the best player on the team, which I don't know that there was ever a stretch like that in his first 2 years. Young as he was, a lot of it had to do with his mentality and consistency, and that's still what it is. With DeAndre, and he still has to keep this mentality throughout a 72-game season. He has to be as consistent as possible in order to be good. And, something you brought up, Dan, that I thought was interesting is the screens. Sometimes he's not even setting screens. Sometimes he's slipping a little too early. That's, I think, one of the things that you can point at to be, it's sort of indicative of his fear of contact. A lot of, I think, his struggles early on has been a fear of contact defensively or offensively. And that's something that he has to fix in order to be as great as possible going forward. So far, so good in the last few games. And I think I would fall on the side of stock up as well. It's a weird thing too, where it's just like Sam said. It's like something just changed. It really feels like all of a sudden there was a different person on the floor for the last 4 games, and it's tough because all Suns fans can say, the people who are trying to have like a legitimate, good faith conversation about DeAndre, and all we can really say is, I hope this remains. I hope this continues. I hope he continues to do that. And that's where I'm at, because it's been really, really good. And I think as discouraging as the last few games have been, 4 out of the last, or I should say 5 out of the last 7 losses, so much of how well he's played and how that has sort of unlocked who Chris Paul is. And there was a stretch where Devin Booker looked like Devin Booker again. If that can sustain, if that can continue, as everyone gets healthy, I think the team can continue to get much, much better. So as much as those losses should have been discouraging, I came out of a lot of that just feeling pretty damn encouraged about what I've seen, because I think they can get so much better.
Let's see. Totally. The other thing with him too, and Eddie Johnson made me think of this, and I don't totally agree, but he had mentioned something about DeAndre Ayton, because they're rebounding with him on the floor is just all over the place defensively. And he had mentioned something about how they could even get some more second chance opportunities if he was smarter about the way he got back on defense, where he thinks that DeAndre Ayton is so concerned about getting back on defense that he's just not in position to grab what would be offensive rebounds. Right. And I'm almost wondering, because like transition defense has been basically up and down for this team all year, trying to keep an eye on that after Johnson had mentioned something. Going back and watching some of the stuff, it feels like, I don't know if he's so like committed to getting back on defense that his first instinct isn't to go for an offensive rebound, where there's a lot of like starting to get back but then coming back, and like does that then compromise the transition defense at all, because now he's been so indecisive that he's changed his mind twice, it feels like.
Right. Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I actually just happened to look at that stat today, and it kind of intuitively makes sense. The Suns are second in transition defense according to Synergy this year, which surprised me. I didn't think they were that good. But I do believe it's a collective point that Monty Williams has been stressing, and it correlates perfectly to DeAndre Ayton is having his worst, not by too much, he's still good, but he is having his worst offensive rebounding season so far. So I think what you're saying there would make sense.
I also think there's a element of DeAndre Ayton where his help defense, a lot of times, this is defensive rebounding, will also lead to not great box outs sometimes. And I think there's a balance of trying to help and trying to get a body on someone, whereas he's commonly looking up at the rim. His box outs could get a little bit better. And those are, I think, the small details in the game, the small little decisions that slow him down. A lot of the offensive struggles, it looked like he was trying to make multiple decisions at once. So, Dan, I like that you use that phrase to talk about the offensive rebounding as well. So there's a lot of it is just finding ways to be more decisive in those small decisions, and that comes with playing more games in the NBA. Even in his second year, missing the games that he did with the suspension and an ankle roll at some point in the season, he still has a lot to learn. I think those small decisions getting better over time can have a large difference for him as a player, whereas for other guys it may not have as big of a difference. I think for centers, those little decisions may make a big difference because of they're protecting the rim. They're the last line of defense.
I'm impressed that they are apparently second in transition defense. I feel like the last time I looked, I was like, oh, they're a lot worse than I thought. But early season swings, I guess I must have looked at it at the wrong time.
Well, and we're still early season, so it could still swing. But yeah, the only other thing I'll say there, I guess, before we move on to the next player, their half court defense is suffering. They're not, they're not that top 10 defensive rating type team anymore after taking all these L's.
Yeah, and they've struggled there. And I think the next guy we're going to talk about is Chris Paul, who's at number 22. And I think so much of pace is like Chris Paul has grinded the Suns down to a really slow pace. And that affects other teams as well. I think in their transition offense, there's just an element of just sort of playing at similar paces. And it's just like this Jedi mind trick that happens. So much of what Chris Paul, I think, does now in the NBA and what he did with OKC is based on like the teams that he was trying to beat in the playoffs. He's always been a relatively slow-paced guy, but with the Rockets, their focus was entirely on finding a way to beat the Warriors, and that's slowing the pace down and doing this grinded-out thing, and lots of isolations because they're trying to avoid help defense and those kinds of things. And then even with OKC, when they took Houston to 7 games, I think a lot of that had to do with grinding it down to a really slow pace again and trying to beat them in the 90s. And I feel like that mentality has sort of stuck with him and what he's doing on the Suns. Now, I would say Chris Paul has struggled a little bit to start this season. He's not hitting the shots that he normally makes. His assists are up, which is something we expected. We talked about it before the season. I still think he's had overall a pretty damn positive effect on the Suns. Obviously a better record than they had at this point last season. But what do you think, Dan? How have you viewed Chris Paul on the Suns so far?
So I think he has been good for this team and will continue to be good, if not better, for them. I'm stocked down on him overall because it does feel like there's been a physical drop-off for him. And I know he's older, but just between last season and now, he really does seem like he's taking 62% of his shots from mid-range, which would be a career high per cleaning the glass. And that's fine when he's shooting 50%, but he's at 30% from above the break threes. He doesn't, those semi-transition pull-ups that he's been so good at from Houston and OKC, where it's like they're not really in transition, but they kind of are because the defense isn't set. He's just not – it doesn't even seem like he's looking for those, let alone really hitting them. And – that sort of just discourages me, and I'm just wondering if they have, I don't want to use the word kowtowed because that has such a negative connotation to it, but are they sort of like investing too much in Chris Paul when Devin Booker is on the court? And that's something that I think needs to be probably more balanced, if not skew more toward Booker moving forward, because Chris Paul is not shooting well off the catch right now, but he will shoot better off the catch. He just doesn't, those aren't shots that he ever has taken.
Right.
And I think now at this stage of his career, given how good Devin Booker is, and just given how drastically, when you look at Devin Booker's shot profile with and without Chris Paul this season, it feels like there's more room to maneuver there. And I don't know if that's just not something that Chris Paul is willing to do, if Monty Williams doesn't want to do it. Something just feels a little bit off where we're maybe getting closer to the Chris Paul offensive decline that we've been waiting for. That being said, he's still just ridiculously good. I'm viewing this through the context of I thought he was still this top 20 guy when I was
22.
writing those rankings.
I mean, that's a really high ranking, and I think at this point of his career, it'd be really surprising if he went up in his rankings rather than down. I think there is an expected decline. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, the ball handling is all still there, but has he lost a step? How much longer can he go on continuing to miss the shots that he's consistently made for the past 10 years before we sort of do have to concede that? And I guess that's not even necessarily a rhetorical question. Like, actually, guys, how long is it? Because right now it's been 15 games. He's at a career low in 3-point percentage. He's at a career low by far, actually, in free throw attempts per 36. To Dan's point, I mean, he doesn't even. I think I literally jumped out of my seat the other night in maybe it was the fourth quarter, maybe it was overtime, but it was a late gameplay in the first Denver game when he actually went for it, like he just exploded and actually went up for a layup, and I was like, whoa, he didn't do a little jump stop.
Michael Green looked shocked.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, you know the play I'm talking about. I was like, wow, he didn't do the little jump stop, 10-foot whatever. And yeah, I mean, so I don't know where is that point? Is it half a season in?
Well,
Is it where is it?
Here's what I'll say to that point. The relationship between Chris Paul and how a center plays offensively is a symbiotic relationship. They go hand in hand. There's some synergy there that needs to happen. And I think that now that DeAndre Ayton is actually looking to score on rolls and Chris Paul has found better ways to get him the ball. I think Chris Paul is passing him the ball in these low bounce passes that DeAndre Ayton struggles to catch, where he's better at catching it up high. If they find that level of synergy, that opens up the court a lot better for Chris Paul. And if those shots are still not dropping now with DeAndre Ayton playing better, I think that would increase my worries about what he's capable of doing as far as scoring the ball. Dan, I think you have a great point about Devin Booker. I think they've struggled to use him properly so far. And I think it's a fair thing to trust Chris Paul to try and work things out and figure things out because of how good he's been. So I don't blame Monty Williams at this point of the season, but I think as the season progresses, I think more of the offensive responsibility should and will properly shift in Devin Booker's favor, and Chris Paul will probably see his usage rate, even though it's not super high, maybe decline a little bit going forward. But yeah, I'm not super concerned about it. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm slightly concerned now, and I think with DeAndre Ayton playing that role a little bit better, I'm going to keep an eye on it a lot more now that that's happening and see where he's at so far.
Yeah, and look, the other thing though is he is shooting 11 of 20 on twos in the clutch so far this season, which is just like, because after watching the two games versus Denver, or most of the two games versus Denver, it felt like he was hitting those shots again. And I, like Sam, was surprised when he actually went for the layup. Those used to not be all that memorable because they happened all the time. But
yeah, there's some very famous ones. The Spurs.
But yeah, at some point you would
playoffs.
think that there's just a higher variance in his shot selection right now, and you would think it's going to tilt in the wrong direction. But he's still, I think overall, and like some of this stuff will take care of itself naturally, where because Monty Williams, I feel like, has done a generally good job staggering the two, that it does make it a little bit easier. But you're going to want them to close games together, and they're going to want to spend more time together with the postseason. And so you'd like to see them have just this better chemical balance. And I thought they would be further along there at this point, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, regarding the clutch situation, Dan, I think it's just kind of interesting. I pulled up these stats the other day. I don't have them in front of me, but Chris Paul has been really good. Like you said, 11 of 20 in the clutch. Devin Booker has been really not good in the clutch so far.
32.2 true shooting, if anyone cares. That is
Jesus,
that is
really
low.
Bad. That's like if
uncharacteristic.
That's like if we waited for Jamal Crawford to turn 50 and then offered him a roster spot.
Yeah, hey, look, right down to the assist to turnover ratio, 0.5 assist to turnover ratio.
Yeah. So my point being, we can have all the conversations in the world about, are we improperly using Devin Booker? Are we investing too much in Chris Paul? But what we have seen, albeit in a limited sample size, is that when push comes to shove at the end of games, who's really running the offense more efficiently? So maybe we should be investing just as many resources as we are into Chris Paul, because come playoff time, he has to be the guy in the final 5 minutes. I don't know.
Do you think that the fit is as simple as Devin Booker's not really a 3-point shooter? Like,
that's part of it.
A lot of the space on the court that they occupy, that those two guys want to get their shots off, are the same. Like they're that sort of mid-range area and the occasional 3-pointer, maybe too occasional for Chris Paul so far, but generally relatively occasional for even Devin Booker. Chris Paul likes to be surrounded by guys who space the floor, maybe even beyond the 3-point line. Devin Booker, even though he can, guys still guard him out there. It's just he's not, he doesn't shoot a ton of them compared to a lot of the stars in the NBA, and he's not super great at shooting them off the dribble. Is it as simple as that? I wonder.
Are you questioning if the winner of a 3-point contest, the Mountain Dew 3-point contest or whatever it was, is a good shooter, Mike?
Taco Bell. Yeah. No, I'm not saying he's not a good shooter, but he's just not quite a 3-point shooter. He's not Klay Thompson. Even to an extent, he's not JJ
Redick.
JJ Redick or James Harden. James Harden is not, catching it and shooting it the way that JJ Redick is, but, shot like 13 threes a game or whatever it was when they were on the same team. I just wonder if it's as simple as they're just not used to playing with another star that's in the same space as, Devin Booker not used to playing with another star, period. But Chris Paul maybe not used to a guy occupying that same space that Chris Paul tends to occupy, and that's just causing it to take a little longer for them to work out than a lot of us anticipated. That's kind of what I'm looking at so far.
Could there be an element too of like, what were we in before this year? Like there was 4 years of Devin Booker being all everything, and to be displaced from the ball at all has to feel awkward. Even I don't remember which game it was I was watching this season. I think it was another crunch time game though that they lost, where it seemed like looked like he was going to go get the ball from Chris Paul, who was above the break, just because he was stationed. Like Devin Booker was not as far left as he should have been for someone who didn't have the ball in that situation, and then that whole possession just looked so clunky. And maybe that's just a natural learning period, because every team is dealing with the abridged training camp and then just the availability even when they're not playing games. Like I don't even know what the Suns' practice schedule looks like. So I would expect it to get better, hopefully, as the year goes on.
The Suns just recently came off a week of no practice together. So even when they had those games postponed, it's not like they were able to work on anything that would be pertinent to better chemistry between those two. So I think that's
one-on-one
a really good
workouts
point.
only.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. It just takes time. I think any time two sort of stars are meeting, they have to figure out how to orbit around each other a little bit better. So, and that leads nicely into the Devin Booker conversation. First of all, Devin Booker at 15 is very high, and I think excited a lot of Suns fans before this season. I just want to ask you, Dan, from the perspective of someone who knows the people that sort of made this ranking, how much of that do you think had to do with the bubble, him being ranked so highly in those Bleacher Report rankings, and how well the Suns played in the bubble?
I think it had a lot to do with it. I was still actually surprised with, giving people like time to give final assessments after I finalized the rankings, and I did give myself carte blanche to make tougher calls that I thought were either egregious or if they were too close and the tiebreaker was weird. But there was some pushback for Devin Booker at 15, so maybe they weren't reading into the bubble performance enough at that point. But I didn't think he was going to end up with, I think before the tiebreak, he would have finished like no lower than 23 or something like that when we went into that, and I thought it was going to be like 25 to 32 type of range. And so there's definitely, I think people saw the bubble and were like, oh, holy crap, and that definitely had to factor into it.
I think it's hard to argue that he's played at a 15th best player in the league level
it's
so
impossible.
far this season. So
impossible to argue.
I would say stock down is an easy choice here, but there's obviously a lot of encouraging statistics there. But what do you think?
So I didn't think this would be like, maybe it is. I didn't think it would be spicy at all. I thought it was a cop-out. I'm stock neutral on him just because it's so early that the fact that the lineups without Chris Paul when he's playing are just absolutely demolishing opponents right now, and that it seems like his turnovers are a little bit more under control in those situations. The biggest actual concern I have about him this year has been the turnovers. Like I feel like a lot of the spacing stuff, the shooting numbers, like those are going to normalize at some point, or at least in my opinion that I think that's going to happen. He has to get used to, when I was looking it up, like he goes from 53% of his shots being unassisted when he plays without Chris Paul or with Chris Paul, 52.9% of his shots are assisted, to 35.6% are assisted without him. And so there's an adjustment period there. I know he's not a pull-up shooter, but like his numbers there from beyond the arc, like that's going to come up. It's not going to be sub 28% forever. The turnover stuff has just mystified me, to go from someone who has been so good in the pick and roll, I feel like the past couple seasons. He's turning the ball over per second spectrum on 23.7% of his pick and roll ball handler possessions, which is the fifth highest among 99 players who have run 30 total pick and rolls this year. So I'm just curious too to what you guys would think is, one, whether that is valid, and if it is, like what is actually wrong here. And there was I think it might have been the Nuggets game where the first one where he had this really weird turnover in crunch time, or maybe it was a different game, but just like he just lost the ball. Like it wasn't a bad pass. He just sort of dribbled into traffic and lost the ball. And so that's the thing that just seems so bizarre to me, that I don't think is necessarily or can be related to Chris Paul, although maybe it can be.
Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, it's mystified both of us, Dan. In taking a closer look at some of his assists, I do think he overcomplicates it for himself sometimes. Something both Mike and I have pointed out in the past is just how frequently now he goes for kind of the secondary option when making a passing read outside of a first one. And sometimes that, he'll do stuff as dumb as jumping midair and then not knowing what to do with it. You know, it's like he's become such an advanced playmaker in some ways that he's gone back to making middle school mistakes sometimes. And you know, so another thing that he does is he'll kind of try to create an easy look for someone in order to lull the defense or draw them in, and then he'll kick it out. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say going for the secondary option. So I don't know. I mean, I think that might contribute to it a little bit. His assists, this isn't related to his turnovers. His assists are down a little bit, I think, honestly, because of Chris Paul. Ricky Rubio is a guy who, say what you will about his shooting, he wasn't a great shooter, but at least he would take spot-up threes. He would take catch-and-shoot threes, and Chris Paul just doesn't do that. So Devin Booker never assists Chris Paul, whereas actually he assisted Ricky Rubio. Sometimes it was in transition as well, so pace has played a part too. They kind of played off each other in a symbiotic way that way. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to get better in time, but I think if he levels out around, I don't know, like 5 assists and 4 turnovers per game this season, like that might be the final average for Devin Booker, and I don't think that would be so bad or so crazy.
And just for some context for people listening, if you split up the first 14 games into the first 7 and second 7, the first 7 games of the season, he's averaging 5.3 turnovers. The last 7 games, it's 3 turnovers a game. So, you know, Dan, you pointed it out. They seem to be getting a little under control. The last 2 games were a bit of a struggle, I think, turnover-wise for him. 5 and 6 in the last 2 games against Houston and Denver. The Houston game was an easy win. The Denver game, you know, obviously went to overtime. And there was, I think, some crunch time mistakes that he made there where he struggled. I think a lot of the mistakes that he's made, I think early on it was getting used to new teammates. But I think one of the main reasons his scoring has gotten better and his turnovers have gone down is getting his legs under him. I think that there's a possibility that maybe he wasn't super in shape to start the season as much as we've gotten used to him coming into the season relatively in shape, and maybe that's something that he wasn't as we anticipated it. You know, I know that there's a bunch of Suns fans right now that are thinking about Kendall Jenner. As I say
was
that,
he at that party where they rented out, like they bought an island or something? And
yeah, he was there
with Tristan Thompson.
How has Tristan Thompson been actually? Now that you mentioned that,
I haven't looked it up, but you know, it would explain why. Because Devin, his finishing numbers, his finishing numbers haven't been what they usually are either. And so some people have speculated that, you know, his lift just doesn't look like what it normally does, and I think maybe it all comes down to just the same general lack of conditioning. I don't know.
That or Chris Paul's already beat his ego into submission and he's tired.
Let me ask you this, Dan, just quickly, because I just looked at the list again. Can you guess? Maybe you can still remember who was ranked 1 spot ahead of Booker?
Who was ranked 1 spot ahead of him?
There's no way you can guess. I mean, there's just no way you'd remember.
There's probably none. Is it 21 seems too low for him. Was it Jaylen Brown?
It was not Jaylen Brown. Now you want me to go and find where Jaylen Brown is. But it was Ben Simmons, which I think is interesting. Who do we have more reason to worry about right now between Devin Booker or Ben Simmons based on their early season starts?
I mean, it's Ben Simmons because the stuff that like he needs to improve upon is stuff he's never been good at. Whereas with Devin Booker, it's like I think a lot of this stuff is just going to come naturally. Like, yeah, the context of his role has changed during the Chris Paul minutes, but he is capable of being that player. And I think if he gets more comfortable, he'll shoot higher off the catch and maybe more often. Like I think both of you said, maybe they'll get him moving off the ball a little bit more. We'll have to see. But like Ben Simmons, it's just he seems less aggressive on offense than ever, which is, you know, he was never been particularly aggressive. You can always get going downhill, but he's going to be that pass-first guy. And so I think you look at him and you would have to just be more concerned about him because I think for his season, there's a point where he could be a better finisher this year and like things will look better there, but he's always just going to be stuck in that vacuum of, well, the things that he's not doing right now are things that he's never done.
Yeah, that's my theory on Ben Simmons is as simple as he has been in trade talks the entire season and it's distracting him. Even before the season, people were saying, is he going to be traded? Is he going to be traded for James Harden? And then supposedly they got so close, or Philadelphia thought they were so close to him being traded that his agent literally told him he'd be in Houston. And yeah, I think that is a bit distracting. And
that's a great point, and I don't think it's one that even people like myself who put so much stock in like the results of the numbers might not consider. And he's been basically since Daryl Morey was there, just stuck. And even like just the noise of people saying that the Sixers should trade him before Daryl Morey was there, that had to really get to him. And I think we saw a little bit with D'Angelo Russell where the Timberwolves are awful this year, but he's better than he was for the Warriors. And it's like, okay, but the talk with him was as soon as they signed him, they did it so they could trade him.
Right.
It's like maybe there was something to that. So that's
Exactly.
actually a really good point.
Yeah, it's just a theory I have, and I like to keep an eye on stars that are going to be available because it's just interesting, and maybe it gets to a point where he wants to leave. It wouldn't surprise me if that were to happen. That relationships can go sour pretty fast with massive NBA stars that have Clutch as their agency.
Especially if they were told they were getting traded to Houston.
That's pretty bad, yeah. I mean, how do you let it get to that point and just find out that somehow you were outsmarted by Tillman Fertitta, of all people? That's tough.
That's rough if you were really burned by Tillman Fertitta.
Yeah, that's tough. I think there's so much of how good the Suns can be is now predicated on how much Devin Booker can get back to playing like he did last year. And I think that's, to your point, Dan, for Ben Simmons, he's got to learn things he's never been good at. For Devin Booker, he just has to play like he was 6 months ago. And that's a good sign for how good this team can be. I trust Monty Williams at this point to have them figure it out. I trust Devin Booker and Chris Paul because they're both professionals who wanted to play together. To figure it out as well, and I think he's going to get better. And we saw signs of that before the hamstring injury. We should say we haven't talked about it. He didn't play. He came out of that Denver game, that first game, and I think the Suns had a good chance of winning if he played the last few minutes of that first Denver overtime game, and then didn't play in the second double overtime game because of a hamstring strain. Hamstring injuries are difficult to predict. He could be out for a game or two. He could be out for a few weeks. We don't really know exactly what the extent of that injury is going to be. So I hope he's back soon. They have a few days off before their game on Wednesday, and it'll be interesting to see what he looks like after that, because I do think he was just starting to get his legs under him a little bit in the last few games. Sam, do you have any other thoughts on Devin Booker before we wrap this one up?
No, I guess just that it's going to be interesting if he does miss extended time, in addition to Dario, who steps up with the free throw load is going to be fun. We might see some tragically low free throw numbers for the Suns over the next few games if he can't get back.
40 minutes a game from Campaign in that situation is the solution.
Yep.
Yeah, and Campaign couldn't even stay in the game due to cramping up because he's not used to getting that level of minutes in that Denver game alone, so it'll be interesting to see how well he can hold up there. Dan, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being someone in national media that pays this close attention to the Phoenix Suns. Follow Dan Favale on Twitter. It's just his name. Listen to Hardwood Knocks, a fantastic NBA podcast that covers the entire NBA. Read his stuff on Bleacher Report and check out NBA Math. Dan, is there anything else that you'd like to plug before we end this one?
No, I got nothing. You covered it all. Thank you guys so much for having me.
We appreciate it, Dan.
Nicola, you faced Aiden in one of his first games last year, and you beat him up pretty bad. After the game, he was pretty shocked by how much trouble he had with you. He seemed like he played well in these two games, but knew that you wound up getting the better of him. I just was curious if you had any thoughts on what you've seen from Aiden as he's developed as a player.
He's amazing. Give the guy credit. He's amazing. He's really solid. He knows what he knows. And he knows like what he needs to work. I think that's the best thing that kind of young player can have that mindset. He played really good defense. He stopped me 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Give that guy credit. He was really good tonight.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.